Thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to see such a great turnout for today's lecture. I'm Martin Kremers. I'm the Dean of Mendoza College of Business. And it is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome and introduce Joe Ucuzoglu, CEO of Deloitte, the largest professional services organization in the United States. With more than 100,000 professionals in the United States, Deloitte provides audit and assurance, tax, consulting, and risk and financial advisory services to a broad cross-section of the largest corporations and governmental agencies. As CEO, Joe leads all aspects of Deloitte's tech-driven transformational strategy, ensuring the firm consistently delivers the breadth of Deloitte's integrated and innovative solutions to clients. Joe's career with Deloitte spans more than 2 decades. Prior to assuming the role of CEO, Joe held various leadership positions within the firm, most recently as leader of Deloitte's audit and assurance practice. Joe also serves on the board of directors of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the board of trustees of the Securities and Exchange Commission Historical Society, the board of directors of the Partnership for New York City, and the executive committee of University of Southern California's SEC Financial Reporting Institute. He's a member of the Fortune CEO Initiative, CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion, the Center for Audit Quality, and the Economic Club of New York. Joe is a California native and a graduate of the University of Southern California. Above all, thank you for being so welcoming. Above all, he's a devoted husband and father of 2, and we're thrilled to have his son Adam here with us today. Please join me in welcoming Joe Ucuzoglu.
Thank you, Dean Kremers, for the very warm introduction. It really is a privilege and an honor to be here, and it's a special partnership that Deloitte and Notre Dame have going back many years. We continue to be the #1 employer of students off of campus here across a broad cross-section of disciplines. I think this is my 5th time on campus. My first was back in 1997, and there were 2 things that stuck with me from that very first visit. One, the beauty of this place. And Dean Kremers and I had a chance to take a little walk earlier. I mean, the level of development, but preserving the special character of this place, it is still every bit as beautiful as I remember it. And 2, more importantly, was the warmness and the opening culture, for people coming together on this weekend. I think 364 days a year, the 2 schools are absolutely the best of friends. There might be one day when that breaks down a little bit, and that happens to be tomorrow. But just the welcoming spirit and the hospitality also really stuck with me. And it's very clear that that too has not changed one bit. I'm going to share a few remarks around what is a very dynamic time in the professional services market. I think should be a very exciting time relative to the opportunities for all of you about to graduate and launch a career. But what I always enjoy most is spending the preponderance of my time in this type of setting, having an interactive dialogue, hearing what's on your mind, answering some questions. So I jotted out a few thoughts, just some things that I'd share up front, perhaps conversation starters, and then we'll go ahead and have a good interactive dialogue. As the Dean mentioned, most important part of me, what defines me as a person, is my family. Got a picture here from our last holiday card, and the newest addition, sitting there in the middle, is Winnie. So when I come home, my wife's busy, she's getting a master's degree in social work. I yell to see if someone will come, maybe greet me at the door. Adam says, I actually can't, I'm in the middle of an Xbox game and it's online, you can't pause the thing, it's gonna ruin the game. But Winnie always comes charging forward. And actually, just before we walked in here, I get a lot of urgent texts in this type of a role, things that demand immediate attention. Well, I got one of those urgent texts right before I walked in here. It was actually from my wife, and she said that she and my daughter right now are debating what Halloween costume to pick for Winnie, and just needed to get the go-ahead before a very important and critical decision. From a work standpoint, far less important. I grew up in Los Angeles. I started my career as an intern in Los Angeles. I have been with this firm my entire career, save for 1-2 year hiatus that I'll talk a little bit about, but it really is home to me. And as you think about the kind of place that you want to bring your talents to when you graduate from this institution, it's critically important that you find the right cultural fit and that ultimately you're working for an organization that aligns with your values and that you believe you're going to have an opportunity to go out in the world and make a positive difference, not just from your own career development and career advancement standpoint, but relative to the communities where you live and work. So for me, Deloitte's been home since my internship at age 19, and I feel like I really grew up in this place. I did take a 2-year hiatus midway through my career. I went and did a fellowship in government at the Securities and Exchange Commission, and that was a foundational experience for the rest of my career to understand the mindset of regulators, the public policy objectives they have, the way in which businesses need to work collaboratively within the confines of a regulatory regime to accomplish their mission in a way that is conducive to sort of opportunity and advancement for all aspects of society. Very, very important, very foundational to all of the opportunities that I've had since then. So I came back to the firm as a direct admit partner. About 4 years ago, had the opportunity to take over the leadership of our audit and assurance practice, and I'll talk a little bit about what we do and where that fits into the whole. And then just recently, effective June 1, was elected by our partners into the role of leading our firm, which is just an incredible honor, but also, admittedly, a sense of obligation that you feel when you come into a role like that. It's an institution that I care deeply about. We have over 100,000 professionals that are part of our U.S. firm. We play a critical role in all aspects of the economy, and there's a stewardship element that comes along with being a leader and always making certain that you're guided by the interests of the whole and doing what's right in terms of the long-term sustainability of the institution, recognizing the dependence that your people have for their livelihood, that your clients have relative to the service that they're receiving, and that the broader economy and society at large have on an institution like Deloitte that has its tentacles into every aspect of our society. So what do we do? I would actually say, what do we not do? And when you look at the breadth of our firm, we structure ourselves into 4 primary practices. Okay? We have what I'd call our traditional accounting practices, our tax practice that helps companies to navigate and comply with a very complex set of rules around the globe. We have our audit and assurance practice that essentially lends our brand. We go out and do work to make sure that when a company reports its financial information to the public, that investors have confidence in the reported profitability, in the reported financial performance, and ultimately can use that information to make good, educated decisions relative to where they're deploying their investment dollars. That collective of sort of audit and tax, what we call the accounting practices, comprises about half the earnings of our firm. Then we have our consultative businesses. In our consulting practice, we engage in a whole host of services relative to helping companies with their strategic direction, their human capital strategy, technology, all the way from advising on strategy to implementing systems, helping companies adopt large-scale ERP packages, migrate to the cloud, and at the end of the day, use technology as a real sort of differentiator in terms of the definition of their business model. And then we have our risk advisory practice, which advises on a whole host of issues relative to risk, regulation, cyber, and that whole host of things that companies need to be on top of to make certain that they're complying with laws and regulations and operating their business in a responsible, sustainable manner. Who works for us? Who doesn't work for us? Okay. I mean that in the figurative sense, not the literal sense. The breadth of disciplines under our roof shocks people. Yeah, we have a lot of people who have an accounting background. We have a lot of people who have a technology background. We have a lot of people who have a medical background. Large numbers of MDs, nurses, quite a few people who have a legal background, engineering, physics, math, service to our country as veterans. You name it, we have it. And so why is that such a breadth of different perspectives wants to come join a firm like ours? Because you certainly have a lot of opportunities as to where you can take your talents. And there's a lot of pure plays out there. If you're a doctor, you can obviously go practice medicine in a traditional medical practice. If you're an attorney, you can go to a law firm. Right? There are a lot of different places where you could ultimately launch and sustain a successful career. The reason why people want to come to Deloitte and stay at Deloitte, and the reason why we're able to differentiate ourselves in the marketplace is because of the fact that we're able to bring together those capabilities under one umbrella and do things that no individual siloed player could do. The challenges that our clients face, the opportunities that are out there, more and more require interdisciplinary thinking, connecting people of different backgrounds to come together and do very special things. I'll give you an example. Right now, the cloud is a hot topic. Right? Technology platforms are moving away from traditional, on-premises structures and into sort of the cloud, which enables you to store and process and analyze large volumes of data at a very low price point. Right? That sounds on its surface like a technology issue. But when a client is going through a cloud migration, think about all the interconnected pieces of that. There's a talent aspect, a change management relative to the way in which people work. How do you take your workforce along the journey? There's a business strategy aspect and a customer engagement aspect to that in terms of what do you do with these large volumes of data that you now have to devise better products and services, to engage with your customers in a much more meaningful way. There's huge tax implications. It used to be you could figure out exactly where you tax an enterprise because you go to the building that's housing all of these servers. Well, in the cloud, this sort of amorphous, vague concept that's divorced from physical reality in many cases, how does a company's tax footprint change? There's huge security implications. How do you make certain your data is secure from cyber threats? And those are just a few sort of off the top of your head examples of the types of issues that come up in one very narrow, it sounds like, oh, you're migrating to the cloud. That sounds like a technology project. Well, think about the power of being able to go out to a client and say, we're actually able to help you think through that multitude of issues in an integrated manner and design holistic solutions versus having to deal with 15 different firms that all bring their one little piece, and who knows if it all connects and optimizes when you bring it together in the aggregate. That's the power of a multidisciplinary firm, and it dovetails very well into what is a very, very dynamic external environment as the world is transformed by this wave of digital disruption. You will hear this term fourth industrial revolution. We're at the very early stages. It is a big deal. It is essentially the coming together of the physical world, the digital world, the biological world, and it will have a transformative impact, not just on business, but on society at large, right? The pace of innovation has never been greater. Now, innovation's not new. I love this slide. You go back in time, this artifact on your left is an old clay tablet that is recording the receipts of cattle in ancient times. This was a big deal for society back several thousand years ago to have the ability to record that type of transaction and to enable commerce. That was a type of innovation. On your right is obviously innovation in today's environment, where now you actually don't need that type of an old manual process to record who owns what. You have drones that are able to go up and visually, sort of using optical recognition technology and algorithms, do the very same thing in a much less manually intensive manner. So what's different though? What's different about this wave of innovation relative to the past? One, there is a recognition that more and more, given the complexity of the world and the way in which all these pieces fit together, that no one organization can design or house within its four walls all of the capabilities to solve these complex issues. More and more, the world is becoming ecosystem dependent, where you're seeing preeminent institutions join up and bring together pieces of know-how, expertise, intellectual property into integrated solutions. The world is becoming more interconnected, and as a result, there's a huge premium that is being placed on the ability to work collaboratively, to design system solutions versus individual point solutions. Two, this round of innovation for the first time is really getting at the core of disrupting knowledge work. Prior waves of innovation were much more about replacing that which was accomplished through physical labor. This now is really getting at the very heart of knowledge work, and therefore at the heart of professional services. And so, some might ask the question, is that, a huge threat? Does that mean that, people are going to be replaced by machines? I would say exactly the opposite. Right? It is absolutely true that the pace at which machines are able to perform advanced cognitive tasks is advancing rapidly. I've got a graphic up here that depicts one small example. If you go back and you try to take the ability of a machine to pass a scholastic aptitude test 5 years ago, it scored at about the 36th percentile. In a period of just 5 years, it's at the 90th percentile. Right? That which looks rudimentary in 1 year, over a very short window of time, can rapidly move up the curve. That said, what machines are good at and what people are good at are oftentimes two different things. And the type of work that is being disruptive is frankly the stuff that is less fun to do, more manually intensive relative to rote routine tasks. And when a machine is able to displace that work, it frees you up. It frees us up as humans to be able to move up the value curve and do more interesting work, and to do that more interesting work earlier in our careers. And even as we continue to see the pace of technology change accelerate, we hire more people every year, not less. So Deloitte just crossed over in our US partnership over 100,000 people. And it is absolutely not coincidental that what we're seeing is this wave of technology disruption only brings about more opportunity, not less. This is about pairing up people with machines to optimize the end value proposition. This is another great graphic here. It's a quote from Picasso. "Computers are useless. All they can do is provide us with the answers." It's incredibly true. If you have a structured question that lends itself to an answer based on an analysis of past data, humans will never compete with machines, nor should we try. But the tough stuff, what clients are really paying for, is what are the right questions to ask? How do you actually go about architecting the future, bringing together different disciplines in new, unique, creative ways? Machines don't even come close. And so sign me up. I will take letting the machine handle the routine processing and allowing me and all of you to frankly take the great input that ultimately helps us make better decisions, but to integrate, to be creative, to design new ways of thinking, new ways of business, new ways of constructing a society. the opportunity is immense. Companies and governments will spend trillions of dollars in the coming years to undertake this digital transformation. And the net winner will be those in the professional services space who are called upon to help them do that. Okay? Now, I'm not going to sit up here and tell you that we have a utopia and that this doesn't come without challenges. There are immense challenges, and frankly, society is going to call upon you, your generation, to help solve for the impediments. So what are the challenges? We have a society right now that is splintered. And you in this room are the net winners. You're the ones who have the opportunity to come to an elite institution, to leave here with a world-class education, to join the likes of a Deloitte. And you all see the power here of a technology-driven future and the way in which that will enrich your opportunities and your lives. There is a large cross-section of society that doesn't see that sees this as a threat, as a disruptor of traditional jobs, and that believes that they will be left behind. And as a result, what you're seeing is a level of political unrest that is, frankly, quite dangerous. Increases in populism, increases in nationalism, and that's not a US-only phenomenon. You can see that in many key jurisdictions around the globe. There's an underpinning of the Brexit vote, political unrest in several major elections, and that, more than anything, worries me. Not our competition. Competition's healthy. It's a foundational element of a market-based economy. Take on our competitors. There's a big market. We'll all do quite well if we're out innovating and doing the right things. But do we have the license of society to operate? And this is an area where I actually think this school has been out ahead. When I was walking in this morning, take a look when you leave here, right outside of this auditorium, there's a quote on the wall that the role of business is to serve mankind. Okay? That is a profound statement. And frankly, what you've seen in the last 2 or 3 months is a huge pivot in terms of business recognizing that if we're going to keep the license of society to bring about this wave of tech-driven change and all the opportunities that come with that, that we're going to have to capture the hearts and minds of a broad cross-section of people in believing that this type of capitalism can be executed on an inclusive basis with opportunities for all. So the Business Roundtable, a leading organization made up of the CEOs of some of our largest companies, Deloitte is a member, just changed its core statement of purpose. For the last 3 decades, it essentially was grounded in a shareholder primacy view, that the purpose of a corporation is to deliver premium returns to shareholders, period. Very classical economic point of view. Read the new statement. If you go Google Business Roundtable statement of purpose, it essentially says that the purpose of business is to serve a broad cross-section of societal constituencies, employees, suppliers and vendors, communities, and that if we actually do all of those things well, that shareholder returns will be a logical outcome. Not the primary purpose, not the sole objective, a logical outcome. And it's a really important evolution if we are, in fact, to retain the ability and the confidence of society at large to give us the permission to continue forward with this fourth industrial revolution, which ultimately, I have no doubt, after a period of disruption, will be a net creator of opportunity and a net creator of jobs. This issue of fear is not new. Go back a couple hundred years. Over 90% of the economy was agriculture-based. And when we went through the first industrial revolution, people were concerned. What would all of these individuals do who were displaced now that machines are being put out on farms? Will we have mass unemployment? It seemed to work out okay. Right? It created far more jobs moving to an industrialized economy than what were disrupted. But it takes several decades. And if you're one of the people who had the old job, several decades doesn't sound like a reasonable value proposition. You know, very interesting that my grandkids will ultimately participate, but what about What about me? And what about being able to take care of my family? And we as a business community now are sitting there at the precipice as we're in the early stages of the fourth industrial revolution, and we have this sort of widespread concern in large portions of society as to how will this play out across the board to make certain that we project a positive, inclusive vision relative to the ability for this to be a net positive for all elements of society, not just half of society. And that will be the defining issue that all of you face as you go out into the world. And I am very, very confident that the background, the education, the values, the principles that are being instilled in you during your studies here will equip you to be the generation that actually takes that on successfully and earns the trust of society at large to continue forward on what is an incredibly promising journey. So I promised I would reserve a big chunk of time for Q&A. I don't see a clock around here, but somebody help me out here. Where are we at? What's that? 11:28. Beautiful. Questions? Anything's fair game. Nothing's off limits.
I'm sorry, could you resist? Oh, sure. Thank you. Is this on? Okay. What is the most surprising change in professional services that you've seen at Deloitte?
The most surprising change in professional services? No, I'd say, I'm not sure I'd use the word surprise, but I would use the word profound in terms of the embeddedness of technology into what we do. You know, historically, professional services was entirely a people-based business, and you would go out to a client and you would agree there's a specific task you're going to do. It takes about this many hours, and you're going to pay us this rate per hour, and that was the underlying construct. What has happened over the past decade is that increasingly what clients expect is that you're going to bring the very best people coupled with the very best technology and platforms. And so we invest large sums in building out tools, assets, platforms that we pair up with our people, and we're then able to go out in the marketplace, and it opens up a whole host of opportunities. So for many of the companies we consult for, instead of saying, we're going to come out and we're going to give you some great ideas and we're going to charge you this much money and then we're going to walk out the door, we can say, hey, we believe this is the art of the possible, but we're going to stand behind it and back it with our own skin in the game. And so let's invest together. And then the outcome, what we get compensated, will ultimately be driven by whether or not we were right and we actually collectively achieved this business outcome. Huge upside relative to both the client's confidence that we're in it with them as a trusted partner, that we ultimately only derive our economic returns when they do, and obviously enables us to capitalize off of a much broader opportunity than just a historical hourly rate model. Huge transformation in the underlying structure of professional services being driven by the impact of technology. Again, technology making people more effective, more powerful. We have twice as many professionals today as we did just 7 or 8 years ago. But pairing them up with technology has opened up so many additional doors in terms of the value that we can add to our clients and communities.
You mentioned the importance of your firm to society and to our economy, and other firms like yours as well. Don't you think it's time for your firm to publish financial statements in the United States, like we do in the UK and other countries?
It's a great question. So the question is, isn't it time for Deloitte to publish financial statements? And we've actually thought a lot about this. And we've asked ourselves the question, and I'd be curious to hear your perspective in terms of what will be the net accretive gain, what will be the purpose? So right now, the reason that companies by and large publish financial statements is because they're owned publicly and their stockholders need to receive that information to see how they're performing and to make investment decisions. Do I buy more? Do I sell my shares? Do I hold them? Well, Deloitte and some of our peers are private partnerships. And so we're owned by our partners, and those individuals who have to make that decision are obviously the partners of the firm. They have access to our financial information. We could go out there and not only publish financial statements, pay to have an external auditor, though it would be a little awkward because it's our competitors that would be the one that we'd engage to peek behind the scenes and do the audit. I'd be curious though, because again, one of the things I think is most important about my role is listening to different perspectives, understanding the viewpoints, and the fact that some of these complex issues have people on all sides with different reasonably held perspectives and trying to ultimately get behind that and make decisions that are right for the firm as a whole. And so I'd be interested just to hear your perspective on what do you think the net benefit would be and who would use that information for what purpose?
Well, I think my perspective is that you're in the business of ensuring transparency for companies, and I think it would be very helpful to all of us if we have that information, if you demonstrate that transparency for your own firm.
Fair perspective that sort of we're in the business of trust and transparency, and shouldn't we sort of take our own prescription? Very, very fair perspective. Oh.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So I have a question about technology and specifically some of the constraints to the audit and assurance practice. So obviously you talked about how Deloitte has all of this technology infrastructure that they can use. Do you see this as an opportunity to be applied in the audit and assurance practice, or do you see some of the tech consulting, the advisory practices like in the cyber practice and things like that kind of conflicting with that because of some of the regulation like Sarbanes-Oxley that prevent the consulting and audit services being provided?
It is a wonderful question. And actually, this has been one of the historical points of debate, particularly from a regulatory perspective of can all this coexist under one umbrella? And when operated in an incorrect manner, it can all go off the rails. And we lived through that about 20 years ago in the environment leading up to Sarbanes-Oxley. What we have found, though, is that the set of regulations put in place back in 2002 has essentially dissected the market, where you have 4 of these big 4 firms. Each of them audits around a quarter of the market. That leaves the other 75% to go perform a whole series of consultative services. So you're not actually doing the audit work and the consulting work for the same client. You're doing them for different companies, but having the skill sets under one roof is actually accretive to being able to do a better service in both of those segments by virtue of the access to scale, capability, technology. And it's a great example. You asked, well, what about in the audit and assurance space? Is this whole technology thing even relevant? You might be surprised to learn, yes, we're making huge investments in technology across our consultative space. We're also making huge investments in technology across our audit and tax practices. We have a massive effort underway to build and roll out both a global cloud-based platform in our tax function and a global cloud-based platform in our audit function. And ultimately, that access to large volumes of data is a huge creator of value and is relying upon the skills and expertise and some of the alliances and partnerships that we formed in our consultative space to actually make those cutting-edge, state-of-the-art, best in profession in the audit and tax space. So this issue of technology disrupting and improving the value of what we do is equally relevant across every one of our practices. Now, what you're seeing as well, though, is overseas, some of the same questions that existed around our business model in the US 20 years ago are now popping up. And there's a lot of angst around the profession, the big 4 firms in the UK, the EU, Australia, South Africa, even a few of the Asian countries. And I would attribute that to the fact that they don't have Sarbanes-Oxley. They haven't put in place that kind of a regulatory framework. We actually are at a place in the US, now having operated for close to 2 decades under that type of a very rigorous regulatory regime, where there has never been a higher level of confidence from the investor community, from the business community, from regulators and policymakers. Look, this is a very heated political environment, okay? And there are lots of things that Washington talks about in the tax, and you will be hard-pressed to go find somebody talking about this issue of the big 4 firms, audit, consulting, tax. It's just not even on the radar, and that should tell one something, that it's generally the subject of a lot of confidence that the system that was put in place is working pretty well. So I see we've got microphones running around, and so I'll let you guys be the arbiters of where I go next.
So you talked a little bit about biology, our biology playing a part in this whole transformation. So for a couple of thousand years, we've been thinking in this linear way. And then here comes technology and exponential growth of it. What do you think, what is the first step in educating the whole mankind on how to follow this exponential growth, and therefore potentially resolving all the political issues arising from the split of, let's say, some have called this digital natives versus digital immigrants?
Nice light question. See, this issue, and this actually better than anything I could have shared, illustrates the point I was raising earlier around how interconnected all of these disciplines really are. And frankly, what you're seeing in terms of change management, the acceptance of technology in society at large, that's not just a technology question, that's a psychology question. It's a human behavioral question. There's a great graph that's out there that sort of depicts over time the pace of change in technology and the ability of people to evolve from an evolutionary standpoint. And that we have clearly crossed over that divide where the pace of technology change is outstripping the pace at which humans can evolve, which is probably leading to some of the unrest, some of the concern around the impact of technology on humanity. The first and most important element here is at least being self-aware, recognizing some of the constraints, why we viscerally react the way we do, and it's so important in every dimension of interacting with each other. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, which is an enormous priority to make certain that our workforce reflects our values, that it reflects the communities that we live in and work in, we find that there are inherent behavioral attributes where people tend to be disposed to form teams of people who are like them. And all of the research would suggest that that's exactly the wrong way to go about forming a team, that the highest performing teams actually reflect a diversity of different backgrounds, of different perspectives, of different business chemistry types, people who think differently. So one of the things we've done is train our people on unconscious bias. What are the things that you should just know, not because you're a bad person, but because you're human, you're naturally inclined to do? What are the negative side effects and the things that get in the way of technology adoption, of an inclusive workplace? And then what are the tools that you can use to overcome those unconscious biases? Because we at least have to appreciate, understand, and accept some of the limitations of humanity to be able to put in place strategies to overcome them. See, immediately back to your right.
How do you mitigate risk for your firm as a professional service in the event of economic downturn?
How do you mitigate risk in the event of an economic downturn? Well, in the seat I sit in, I get asked the question, how do you mitigate risk in a whole host of different environments? We have geopolitical risk, we have technology risk, we have brand risk. As a $45 billion global organization where any one thing we do in one pocket can get attached to the brand as a whole. What you just mentioned is obviously one significant topic of interest right now because we appear to be heading towards the end of a business cycle. We're in a 10+ year expansion, the longest economic expansion on record. We're not in the business of trying to predict economic cycles, and I can't tell you whether we'll ultimately hit a recession in 4 months or 14 months or 3 years. And frankly, it's not that critical to me as to exactly when it is. What's more critical to me is the long-term positioning of the organization. So we do a lot of stuff that companies need throughout economic cycles. And frankly, people traditionally think of audit and tax as being somewhat recession resistant. You don't sort of stop using audit and tax services just because there's a business downturn. But even in the consultative space, digital transformation is becoming so foundational and non-negotiable that even in that space, there is an expectation of continued strong demand, which is what we saw during the last recession, even during the worst financial crisis in 70 plus years during 08, 09, we continue to see very strong demand in our consultative businesses as well. But obviously we're not immune from economic hiccups, and companies, when you're going through that, tend to delay buying decisions and tend to make cutbacks. And so what we want to do is go in at the strongest possible position so that we're approaching that from a position of strength and that we can invest through the cycle. Because that also happens to be when some of your greatest opportunities manifest themselves. I'll give you an example. Back in 08, 09, in the last big recession, one of our large professional services competitors went bankrupt. We had the opportunity to go in and buy that practice out of bankruptcy, literally for pennies on the dollar. That is now the foundation of our government services practice in the federal space that's become about a $2 billion practice for us. It picked up for a nominal purchase price in the last downturn. So those who go in strong are able to continue to invest, continue to go out and attract and retain the best people, go out and ultimately combine with some in the marketplace who weren't as fortunate, and to build scale and come out even stronger. Because look, recession's a scary word. Many of you, have not even sort of in your, later more mature years even lived through one. They last somewhere 6, 9, 12 months. All the indications would be even when we ultimately hit one, we're not necessarily set up with huge excesses in the economy to have it be overly severe. You get through it and you move forward even stronger. What else? No predictions for tomorrow, I hope. It's not looking good for my team.
Hello. Okay. So I got a question. So how does Deloitte compete with technology giants and Silicon Valley firms for technological talent?
That is a wonderful question. How does Deloitte compete with some of the digital giants for talent? We all of us leading preeminent institutions, have to make our case to you as to why you're going to have a fulfilling career with an opportunity to make a real difference. Right? And you'll have to decide for yourself what types of opportunities you want over the long term. And increasingly, we don't even view the digital giants as competitors. They're competitors in some cases for talent, but relative to our business, they're privileged partners. These are organizations that we've built alliances with and go to market together. So I mentioned earlier the example of a migration to the cloud. Well, when we go out to an opportunity in the marketplace, it might be a team coming to that client saying, let us show you what we can do for your organization if we combine forces. Deloitte, with our industry knowledge, with our C-suite relationships, with our technology background, strategy, analytics, the whole host of professional high-end skill sets, paired up with one of the big ERP vendors, paired up further with one of the big cloud providers to ultimately host this thing and to bring together the power of all three organizations, and then increasingly tapping into the large ecosystems of startups for niche technologies that might plug in and create an overall integrated solution with a competitive advantage. So those organizations, yes, we happen to be competing for talent, we're actually going to market together. We're building partnerships to deliver value together, and then you'll be able to decide, do you want to work for an organization that has as its core mission the development of software? And for some of you, that might excite you, and you should, by all means, if that's the sole thing you would like to do, that might be a great place. We also happen to be a big developer of software given the platforms that we're building, but with a much broader suite of capabilities and a much broader range of opportunities over time to see all facets of business issues. And if that's what excites you, is sort of looking at problems through a multi-dimensional lens and having the opportunity to work in different parts of a large professional practice, then we might be the right place for you. But you'll go get to meet these organizations and ultimately determine where you want to focus your time and talents.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi. So one of the biggest aspects of doing a 4.0 transformation is getting to actually store and use the data. So how does Deloitte use data science within their company, and what types of analytical or data science projects do clients ask for?
Really good question. So people talk about data, and it's almost become a buzzword, and data is the new oil. But the foundational question is, what do you actually do with it? So now we have the ability to, for the first time, to store large volumes of this at a low price point. That's what the cloud has delivered. Now what do you do with it? That's where cognitive and artificial intelligence come into play. So these technologies don't operate in isolation. The cloud is essentially the admission ticket to be able to leverage the rapid advances in cognitive and artificial intelligence. And that's becoming pervasive across our practice. Sometimes they might be standalone projects, but more often they're integrated into a broader engagement. A hospital system contracts with us in terms of how do you use data to drive better patient outcomes. Automotive is working with us in terms of how do you actually bring to life the future of mobility and to use large volumes of data to fuel sort of autonomous eventually. In the tax space, the multitude of data gives you insights in terms of optimizing your overall tax footprint. And even in the audit space, where your fundamental objective is to try to go in and figure out if there's a problem somewhere in the organization, if something isn't stated correctly from a financial standpoint. And historically, in the absence of knowing where to look, you just kind of randomly poked around. Well, that's not nearly as efficient as using advanced analytics to hone in on anomalies and ultimately get to the heart of the highest risk areas so that you can spend your time delving into the areas of greatest risk and greatest opportunity. So more and more, what you see is these cognitive capabilities being embedded across every type of engagement that we might perform. I know you said that we're out of time. I think you now get to go grab some lunch. Actually, when we were coming over here this morning, and my son heard that they were serving Chick-fil-A, he said to me, "Dad, how do you know if they're going to come for you or for the Chick-fil-A?" And I said, "It's a great question. I'm not sure I really care as long as they're here." Thanks for hosting me.
Thank you, Joe. We have two small gifts as a token of our appreciation for sharing your insights on the fourth industrial revolution and how that is really transforming professional services, but really how more generally business is done. It was very insightful. We're very grateful. We have first a Notre Dame tie, just in case you're looking. Just in case you're looking for something to wear tomorrow. And another present. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for coming.